Hey, this is Kyle Benedict with MISO BIM. This tutorial topic is on dimensions, and this course is considered beginner level. This course will teach you about the various standard dimension types, how to place dimensions, and how to edit your dimensions. Dimensions are system families that can be used to move elements as well as to annotate our model for construction documents. There are some dimension types that come standard in any Revit model, and those include aligned, linear, angular, radial, and diameter. You can find the dimension tools under the Annotate tab, or using the shortcut icon at the top. Clicking either of those will get you to the same dialog box. Once you select your dimension type, you'll see we've got a few options in the green ribbon, and the first is where you want your dimensions to be located relative to the objects you're dimensioning. This first drop-down obviously only pertains to walls, but you have the option of snapping your dimensions to the wall center lines, wall faces, center of the core, and the face of the core. Next, you have the option to choose an entire wall or an individual reference. And then within that, Revit will also dimension to any openings that are in that wall, intersecting walls, and also intersecting grids, depending on if these boxes are chosen or not. So let's go through some of these options and see the differences. First, I'm going to do wall faces and individual references. Since I chose wall faces, your mouse and the dimension line are going to want to gravitate towards one of the faces. So I select that. My next point is another wall face, so I can just do this one, and that creates the dimension. Now you'll see that the command is still live, and third click of your mouse will place that dimension. And it's as easy as that for a single dimension. Now if I want to do a dimension string, I'll do the same process. Select that wall, select this wall, and select this wall. Once again, I'm going to click somewhere in white space to finish the command. You'll also notice that as I get close to this other dimension, it will snap. And that is a preset distance, so all your dimensions, if you have multiple strings, will look uniform and set to a distance from each other. So I'll click here again, and there's an entire dimension string. Do that one more time, and you'll see over here, before I select somewhere in the white space to finish the command, maybe I don't want to include this little wall here. So I can go back and select that while I'm still in the command, and that will unselect that particular wall. And then I could choose somewhere else if I wanted, the center of that door perhaps. Don't like that, so I'll select there again, and it will uncheck it. Now let's say you just don't want to finish this dimension string at all. I can simply hit escape or right click and cancel, and it will do the exact same thing, and that is just eliminate the entire dimension string altogether before you even place it. Okay, this time we're going to try the entire wall option. And before we check any of these, we're just going to leave them all blank to see what this does. So I'm going to select this wall, and you kind of have to think backwards about this, because even though I'm selecting this wall, what I'm really doing is dimensioning the points where the other walls are hitting it. So you'll see as I move my mouse to the left, I'm still on wall faces, so it's doing the outside wall face. If I move it to the right, it's doing the inside wall face. And you're probably realizing this is a little bit more efficient because I just did in one click what it took me 2 clicks to do using individual references. And it gets even more efficient when you add other walls to it. So let's say I select this wall, and knowing that I'm selecting this wall, it's actually going to dimension in these 2 spots, like so. So I've got technically 1, 2, 3, 4 clicks that I just did with 2 clicks of the mouse. So I'll place this over here and finish the command. Now, maybe you wanted this dimension to go to the outside part of this wall. That's no problem, because we can simply select the blue grip here, hold your mouse down, and then drag it to any object that you want to pull that dimension string to. And in this case, it's that part of the wall. and now it changes the dimension accordingly. Alright, let's delete that and do this one more time. Now using some of the other options we have in here. So, if we use the entire wall option and also want it to dimension openings, I can do that by center or width. Also choose intersecting walls, and we don't have any intersecting grids, but once you see this example, you'll probably get an idea for what it'll do. Hit OK. So now this time when I select this wall, it's choosing every intersecting wall to the wall that I selected. Now if I go down here to this wall, remember we also chose openings, which the door is considered. So I'll select that, and it's doing all the intersecting walls plus the center of that opening. And that's getting pretty congested, so in this case maybe we will just do openings, and instead of center we'll do widths this time. So I can just hit that, and it does the width of that opening along with the outer two walls. So that's the basic gist on placing the dimensions. Let's go through some of the dimension options we have. You saw me using the align dimensions, and align dimensions are simply a dimension string between parallel objects. So again, I can choose this, and it doesn't always have to be walls. I can do these beds. 2 clicks, click to end the command, and you have your dimension. Let's clear this out a little bit. Next up is a linear dimension, and the best way to look at this is a orthogonal dimension between 2 points. So the points, as you can see in that example, don't always have to be parallel, but it's going to give you a vertical or horizontal dimension. And you'll see it doesn't, I have to zoom in really tight, and you can just barely see the little dot of the point that you want to dimension from. So if I select this guy and this guy and this guy, you'll see it'll either give me an option of doing it vertically, or if I move my mouse up here, the horizontal dimension. I can also give you another example like the one in this little help box. So again, a linear dimension might go from this point to that point, and it will give us that exact horizontal dimension, or if I move my mouse this way, the vertical dimension. Actually, I'll keep that out there for the next one, which is angular. Pretty straightforward. We can select the face of this wall and get the dimension in between. Of course, depending on where you move your mouse to, that will either be the acute or the obtuse dimension. Next we have radial. Again, with all these you can choose parts of your walls, and in this case I'll do the face of this. That's a funky little number, but if we drag that grip to the center of it, it's a nice even number. Radius and diameter are pretty much the same command. It just gives you one or the other. In this case that's the diameter, obviously twice the radius. You may also notice that when you select an object, you get some automatically created dimensions in blue. These are called temporary dimensions. Okay, so you see I've selected the bed. The temporary dimension is telling me that it is 12 foot 5 3/4 from the center of that wall. But I want that dimension to go to the face of that wall. So I can again select the grip. I'm holding my mouse down, and it's not selecting the face, but all I have to do is hit the tab button on my keyboard. And now it highlights that face, and now I'm going to let go of my mouse. And now I have that new dimension. So let's say I want this to be an even 12 feet. I can select the dimension, change that number to 12, hit enter, and now it automatically moves the bed. And that dimension is confirming that that is exactly what I wanted, 12 feet away. Once I deselect the bed, that temporary dimension goes away. But let's say once I move that bed into the right position, I want to keep that temporary dimension. So I'll select the bed again, and usually if you do move a temporary dimension, it will remain in the same place that you moved it the last time. So, like I said, I want to keep this dimension now. You'll see the little blue dimension button right next to the dimension string. By selecting this, it will make that temporary dimension permanent. So I'll select that. Now it is live in my model. And there's our temporary dimension that is now a permanent dimension. And I can move this wherever I want. Now I'm going to do this for a wall and show you a couple ways to control temporary dimensions a little bit better depending on how you personally work. You may have noticed when I selected that bed the first time, it went to the center of that wall. And again, if I select a wall now, it's going from center to center. That may be fine for some people. Other people like it to go to the face of the walls itself. So if that's the case, we can change these settings in our temporary dimensions in the Manage tab. Go to Additional Settings. Go all the way down to the bottom here. And Temporary Dimensions. And you'll see by default, your temporary dimensions will go to whatever option you choose here. I'm going to say Face for now. And for doors and windows, it'll be center lines or openings. Center lines is good for me. So I'll hit OK now. And now when I select this wall, you'll see the new temporary dimensions are going to the faces of these walls rather than the center points. And again, I can select that if I want the dimension to stay out in my drawing, or I can simply change the dimension as it is, and the wall moves accordingly. And to be honest with you, I love temporary dimensions because I rarely ever use the Move tool. I can select an entire group of objects like this, okay? If these are all going to move this way, let's say this restroom is becoming an accessible restroom and we need a little more space here, I can choose the Move tool, but I really don't have a reference on how big this stuff is. And maybe further down the line you might put some dimensions in and you'll know, but before you do that, we can select all those objects, hit Activate Dimensions, which will give us a few temporary dimensions, and now I can just move these dimensions to where I need them. So this one is already in the right place on that wall. This one is connected to the bed, but I'm just going to drag it to this wall. And we've got 6'11" and some change. Let's make that an even 8. So I just select it, hit 8, hit Enter, and you see all the objects I selected move together. Let's say I'm going to do that exact exercise again. But this time I already had a dimension there. Okay? So instead of 8, let's make it 8, 6. So I'm going to select all these objects again. I want to move that wall. And now, when you say Activate Dimensions, you can simply change that dimension that's already there. And everything moves accordingly. I personally like that better than using the Move tool because it's more precise and exact to me. You know, when you select the Move tool, you have to choose a start point, choose an end point, and sometimes your mouse may click on some hidden objects or some hidden reference planes, and odds are that might not happen, but when you use the other method of just activating the dimensions, you know it's exactly going to be whatever you tell it to be based on where that dimension string is. All right, let's talk about another great feature of the dimension options, and that is the Equal tool. Let's say we want to center this side table between the two beds perfectly halfway. We could calculate the distance using the Measure tool or Dimensions, then figure out what the halfway point is, then move that to the halfway point. Or we can do the quick and easy way, which is dimension one part of the bed, go to the center line of that table, dimension to the other part of the bed, place our dimension, and you'll see there is this Equal option. When the red line is through it, obviously that means things aren't equal. But you can select that by putting your mouse over it, clicking your mouse, and once you do that, it should move the table equally between the two beds. Just like that. And then it changes your dimensions to say equal, equal instead of the actual dimension length. But let's say we do want to show that dimension length between the bed and the table instead of it saying the equal sign. We can select that. Over in our instance parameters where it says equality display, instead of text, we can say the value. And there you go. Something to note about putting an object equal space between other objects. is that when those other objects move, that object will always stay equal between the two objects. I'm just going to nudge this bed up a little bit, and you'll see the table is always staying halfway between the two beds, because that's where the dimensions are set to. You'll also notice that when I delete these dimensions, we'll get a little pop-up saying that even though we're deleting those dimensions, this object is still constrained between the other two objects that we made it equal. So if we hit OK, and I move this bed, the table still moves halfway between the two of them. If I do that again and hit unconstrain, then that will break that reference between the two objects and the dimensions. So if I move the bed now, it moves completely independently of the table and the other bed. The equal dimension option also works for multiple objects. So I can select the wall, this bed, and this wall. And when I hit equal now, it's going to give me equal spacing from edge of this wall to the center of the bed, that center of the bed, and that edge of that wall. What happens when you move one of those objects now, though? It's going to tell you that the constraints cannot be satisfied and you have to remove the constraints or cancel the operation. If I hit remove, it will simply just move that bed by itself. But another cool thing about these dimensions is they're pretty smart. So if I select this bed, make that 6 feet off of the wall, I select this bed and make that 6 feet off the wall, if those two outside dimensions are the same, Revit will recognize that and give you the equal sign rather than the value itself. Again, we can change that right here if we don't want to see that, but it is pretty helpful to have that option. So that's going to conclude our beginner video on dimensioning. Be sure to check out our other videos where we talk about the different dimension types, the properties of those dimension types, and also how to manipulate those properties. Thanks for watching.